This week's episode was brought to you by Jordan Elizabeth, Clayton Johansson, Vinnie Liebert, and Sarah Puckey. Thank you, Jordan Elizabeth, Clayton Johansson, Vinnie Liebert, and Sarah Puckey. It's with the generous support of listeners like yourself that we here at The Whole Rabbit continue to hold compulsory banquets for all the famous people in the land, getting them drunk, force them to make silly speeches that will immortalize, and make fun of for literally thousands of years. If you'd like to offer a silly speech or just hear the second half of the super duper secret half of this episode, then please navigate to www.patreon.com/thewholerabbit, where your web browser can be used to digitally offer us a mere $5 in tribute that will instantly earn you monthly access to our entire library of extended episodes, stretching back into a time so full of memory holes the Swiss have filed a lawsuit. But not only that, I'll send you a 5x5 vinyl sticker of our big Bunny Baphomet cover art that is so sticky it will almost stick to anything. And if that were not enough, you'll receive access to our Discord server where we drink Kaikion and wax philosophic about the machinery of the universe. If you're enjoying The Whole Rabbit but are saving your $5 for a pressurized can of lactose-free whipping cream, then please consider doing us a solid and feverishly ranting in public or a friend about this show and see if they feel impelled to actually listen to an episode. If they don't, brainwash them. And when the police show up, make sure to tell them too. In this week's episode, we're joined once again by the Mighty Julian the Philosopher to continue our discussion about the world's most important philosophers, the ideas they championed, and how we can use their wisdom to untangle the madness that has come to define our modern world. In this episode, we focus on the most important mind to ever grace Western civilization, Plato, with some emphasis placed on his dialogues in the Symposium and various arguments made in the Republic. In the extended side of the show, we begin to explore how Plato's teachings intersected with Nietzsche and Aleister Crowley, stopping to read some poetry from a number of the authors we discuss, and conclude with a view of the dark science fiction dystopia that stretches out before us on our next leg of the journey to seek the good life. Thank you, and enjoy the show. Why did prostitutes in 330 BCE dislike Plato?
Why?
Because his teachings were too thought-provoking. You don't get it?
No.
A thought is a whore.
Oh, I didn't know that.
She doesn't follow culture or the trends. She's too busy contemplating the good.
She's too busy solving all of the mysteries of the underworld.
Of my underpants.
6, 7?
Plato absent-mindedly bumped into someone while walking down the street. So he hands him this book and says, "Please accept my apology." Get it? No one? Oh my goodness.
I get it. I'm just eating.
Okay, that's not allowed.
Can't read.
She picked canned laughter.
Who is Socrates' worst student?
Who?
Mediocrities.
I like that one.
Well,
Wow.
first of all, it's pronounced Socrates. I mean, I've seen Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, so get your right, dude.
Is he even real?
Socrates?
Yeah.
Hell yeah. I've seen him in the movie.
Okay.
Like, Napoleon's in it, Genghis Khan. It's awesome.
All right, which one of his students was busiest?
Who?
The one that had a lot on his Play-Doh?
Eh.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
I hate it when I get stuff on my Play-Doh.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Whole Rabbit, where we don't just argue amongst ourselves about the naked ontology belying the vacuous pit of popular culture orchestrated by the shadow puppeteers circumambulating the subterranean barbecue where the grill masters became a little too ornery with the liquid accelerant after shotgunning a container of liquid pretzels at Madame Blavatsky's torture dungeon. Nay, we occasionally open our banquet chambers to invite the best and wisest company in the kingdom to share in an evening of drink, conversation, and deep insight about the meaning of life itself. Because this week, we're joined by our guest Julian the Philosopher to discuss the bedrock of Western philosophy as expressed principally by Plato. I'm your host, Luke Madrid, also known as the Hack Rabbit. I'm joined this week by the Guardian of the Grove, Mari Sama.
Yeah, we're full, so it's a $5 cover charge.
That's right! You can go park over there. The Glitter Horse of the Golden Bow, Heka Astra.
Hello.
And the Hospitaller of the Holy Hallway, Tim, the Heartbreak Kid hacker.
Have you even been to the realm of forms, bro?
That's the shape store, Tim.
Don't give it away.
Oh my god, you're so right.
This week, we're joined once again by the mighty mind of Julian the Philosopher, whose Medium articles and podcast interviews are taking the wise world by storm as he continues his crusade across cyberspace to preach the evangel of cyberpunk metaphysics, which at its spires reach into the domain of science fiction, yet are firmly rooted in the fertile bedrock of ancient philosophy. Welcome back to the show, Julian.
Thank you very much. Appreciate you having me again.
So it sounds like your latest article, or one of them that you've put out, reveals a musical harmony hidden within the writings of Plato.
Yes, so recent scholarship has been able to verify some very old claims about there being a hidden musical composition within Plato's works when you use AI to decipher each one of the books if you align them in mathematical categories.
Whoa! And so it's basically a structure behind his writings that once it's revealed show a hidden teaching, one that's not necessarily committed in language.
So if you study Plato's work, normally what you would find would be that there is actually a song that's openly talked about. It's called the music of the spheres, if we talked about last time, or the musica universalis, the music of the universe. And that was actually a Pythagorean theory. And it's talked about to a certain degree by a character who is in Plato's Republic, and his name is Timaeus. And you may recall that there is also a dialogue that bears his same name as well. And he recounts a version of creation within the story that basically tells a Pythagorean creation story where music and the composition of music is related to the structure and the creation of the universe and the ordering of the universe. And so there's been a lot of scholarship and questions about whether Timaeus was a real person or not, because Plato portrays him as a character, as a wealthy Pythagorean philosopher, which is interesting because Plato himself is not in his own story. He doesn't appear at all, even though his brothers do, Adeimantus and Glaucon. Both of them do actually appear, and Timaeus appears. So there's a lot of questions about, is Timaeus actually Plato? And he's like sharing his own ideas through this other philosopher who's in the story as well. And so some people think he is him, just sharing another version of events. And instead of using Socrates, who he normally uses to puppet his views, Timaeus may also actually be Plato as well. So there's questions if he pops up in multiple points.
It's like Plato's alter ego, like Ziggy Stardust, but it's Timaeus.
It's his scientist alter ego, right?
Yeah.
Like,
It's his Pythagorean character that he's created, but he's using him just like Socrates to speak his ideas into existence. And Timaeus does talk about the music of the spheres. So there is kind of music already talked about. And also, don't forget, in the Symposium, it's a house party. They're having a house party, they're drinking, there's music, it is a party. Music has to be considered as like another layer underneath of the intellectual layer that we're used to dealing with.
so that's what I listened to via audiobook to prepare for this episode, because I was not familiar with the Symposium, and I'm sure glad I did, and not for the boy love, for the wisdom. And I gotta be honest with you, I'm gonna have an easier time talking about what is written and the core principles of Platonic philosophy than I am the unspoken esoteric aspect, as much as I want to present myself as the master wizard. And I think it would probably do best for ourselves and our audience to begin, before we ascend to those levels, to begin at the base principles and start with what forward-facing part of Plato makes him so important even today.
Okay, so I guess we have to begin at the beginning as usual with these kind of characters. So we have to speak about Plato as a human being as well in order to understand his place in history and the context, since context is king. We have to understand how he became the most significant character in Western civilization's ancient timeline. So the beginning of his life, he was born into an aristocratic family, and his early life was also shaped by the Peloponnesian War. The defining traumas in his life turns away from politics towards philosophy. So he traveled to the Mediterranean, he traveled to Egypt, he traveled to Italy and Sicily, searching and studying for Pythagorean math. So we have a connection here where you can see Egypt coming into play and you can see Pythagoras coming into play. So we have some other peripheral characters that are important to him. But what's most important that we have to focus on first is the man himself. He was actually, Plato, what it actually means is broad. So he was, it's not actually his real name. His real name is like Aristocles. Plato was like his nickname. It was like his username, like a screen name or something, like he was a live streamer. And Plato just means broad. So he was literally a workout Chad, and he would work out all day. And it was a very popular activity in Athens because the gymnasium was popular. You would see the Olympic athletes walking around everywhere. And the Olympic, it's interesting. This is the thing I brought up last time. The Olympic athletes themselves would work out all day basically, and they would be essentially, it's interesting, they're called Olympians because they look like gods, or essentially, right? Like walking on earth. And they would be given free food basically by Athens because they wanted these people to train and become great, essentially, right? It was all about the optimization of the individual about in the ancient world and in the Athenian perspective.
Well, I was reading book 6. I was surprised to learn that Socrates says that young people should focus on sports and refine their body and become in better shape because they can get burned out on philosophy if they start too early, and that it's better to start with those things and then move towards philosophy later. But it was of central importance taking care of the body.
I'm not going to go into it that deeply, but essentially they always depict Plato, Socrates, and Aristotle as these extremely old senior citizens. But in reality, the way that the Athenians saw Plato was as a weightlifter and a bodybuilder. So he would have been like a very strong person. It's complete opposite of what they tell you in school, right? So some of those AI Chad edits where they show him as like a bodybuilder just like lifting weights would be more accurate than those versions of him where they depict him as a very old person who's very incapable. So, and don't forget that Socrates also fought in the Peloponnesian War for Athens as a soldier. So both of these characters are people that have been, well, at least Socrates has been battle tested, and Plato is a very physically strong individual. So it makes a lot of sense that his philosophy would also, like the microcosm and the macrocosm, Plato believed that the man was a microcosm of the state and the city was a macrocosm of the individual. So you could measure the state by the individual. So he wanted, for example, in his utopia, the guardians of his utopia, notice that they're also men and women. They're not just men, that the guardians of his utopia would be given equal training, the men and the women, to be superior. And I think he got that from the Olympians, but he also got that from Sparta as well, because this kind of training regimen also seems very similar to the Spartan philosophy that I've been studying rigorously, because Greece is not just about Athens, despite what our history teachers would have us believe.
Yes, in the Symposium, it concludes the teachings of Diotima, who's a lady, and then throughout the dialogue, it directs you towards the idea that lovers would be the ideal partners on the battlefield, and from there, you're just a wink and a nod away from Sparta. You know what I mean?
Okay, so Diotima is an extremely important character that people overlook. She's one of the only female philosophers, I think the only one that's mentioned in Plato's Republic, I believe. Although there were some very prominent female philosophers in Athens and in Greece, the only one that he mentions within the context of Socrates is Diotima. So she's actually an experienced midwife and a nurse, and she is a teacher who teaches Socrates about life and about love. So when Socrates is speaking, you're not really sure if he's speaking from Plato's perspective or is he speaking from Socrates' perspective. And that's another whole debate. Who is speaking when he's speaking? Is it this person? Is it that person, right? And basically, Diotima is an interesting character because, like I said, Plato believed in like a version of equality, although that he believed in gender equality, but he didn't believe in individual equality. So he didn't believe that all people were equal, but he believed that men and women should be treated equal, because I believe that Plato believed in reincarnation, which is reiterated in the story. And he got that from Pythagoras, meaning that he believed that humans were switching bodies, but the soul remained the same. So the education of the soul was primary. The body education was also important, but the main education is of the soul, because the soul lasts longer than the body and goes to a different one.
In the Symposium, he sits through all these speeches and, they're praising Eros. They call him the oldest god, the youngest god, the best god. And when Socrates takes the stage, it sounds like almost everyone's left the party by then. But even still, he's hesitant to speak because based on what Diotima has taught him, he's about to contradict all of this praising that has come of Eros. And you can tell he almost is like pissing off the audience, being like, do you really think Eros is beautiful? You know, do you really think Eros is good? And it sounds like he just gets to the point where the audience is really getting tired of him. And then he's like, this is what Diotima taught me. And then he starts basically repeating what she told him. Because when he came to her, he's like, yeah, of course Eros is beautiful. And of course Eros is good. And she has to school him. It's of no small importance because, as Diotima reveals to him, Eros is not necessarily a god, but that doesn't make him unimportant. It makes him a medium through which all of magic and ritual occurs, which is a big reveal, especially from a woman philosopher, no doubt, one that he has placed above himself as a teacher in this regard. I found that to be positively striking and unexpected. And it's funny that that's the one text that they didn't show me in class.
So I have a lot to say on Diotima, that I think that she's got a bad rap, and I think that Western philosophy in general has gotten a bad rap because they believe for some reason that there were no women contributing to philosophy, which is like a huge mistake, because I think just like how there's all these philosophers that contributed today, you can kind of see that a lot of them have been marginalized for whatever reason. It's like if their views don't go with this particular view, then it's been cut from history, it's been removed, it's been changed. If anything, you can see Plato actually engaging in that himself because he's erased himself from his own dialogues.
Yeah.
So the self-erasure is something that we have to talk about, right? So like, why did he remove himself? Well, the reason is because he doesn't want to have himself saying these things because his mentor just got executed for impiety. And there was a lot of questions that I brought up as well about why Socrates was assassinated, basically. And there's a lot of questions are like, oh, well, he was executed because he was corrupting the youth, or he was executed because he didn't believe in the gods of the state. But I think there's a lot more complicated reasons for it as well. And I think Plato knew that if he openly talked about questioning the gods or repeating these words with his own voice, then he would get into trouble. So he used these other people kind of like a ventriloquist, essentially. And a lot of these women also in history, they would also be attacked as well and, you know, removed from history the same way that Plato was forced to remove himself. So it's kind of like a safety precaution, essentially. Like you can almost see that it's very different because the way that Plato writes, it's like everything's hidden, everything's esoteric. But when you look at Aristotle, he's very clear about everything. He's very open. And why is that? Because Plato lives at a time where Socrates was killed by his government, and Aristotle works for Alexander the Great. He moves to Macedonia, becomes a tutor hired by Philip of Macedon, Alexander the Great's father, and then he teaches Alexander the Great. And so he's living in Macedonia. He's already left Athens, and he's not subject to the same kind of rules where talking about these political topics and these ideas and these people could get you removed. He was basically a lot more free to talk about what he wanted to. And that's why Aristotle has a very different writing style, and he's not subject to the same forces of political nature that Plato is. That's why we have to consider the context and who these people are. Although Plato's very strong, we can't underestimate him and say he's just a weightlifter. He's actually, even everything as simple as the invitation of Socrates to the Symposium party is actually a metaphor for democracy, because they come to Socrates and they say, oh, we don't see you here very often.
Yeah.
And then they kind of force him to go to the party against his will.
Yeah.
So it's like an example of democracy, because they're like outvoting him. They're like, well, there's more of us than there are of you, so I guess you have to come with us to the party because we say so. So it's kind of like Plato making a funny thing that people don't usually catch. And I didn't catch it the first 10 times I wrote it either. So,
well, there's something very humanizing about the Symposium. And if you were in college, it'd be very meta to read it because it's just a bunch of dudes hanging out. And it sounds like they're partying for a number of days. And the Symposium happens on the second day where, based on their conversation, they're fairly hungover. They feel most queer, and they're not ready to do what they call compulsive drinking, which suggests there are some days they set aside to get really hammered. And those were the days they sort of like communally decided. The word they use is compulsive. So they decide they're not going to force anyone to drink. They're just going to drink as much as they feel like. What's humorous about this is they do come to this decision democratically. You know what I mean? Like, do we want to drink a little or a lot. What do we decide, people, you know? And so I see what you're saying here, where this living room has become a microcosm of the macrocosmic democracy.
So Phaedrus argues that love is the oldest and most powerful god, inspiring virtue and courage. And
Yeah.
Pausanias distinguishes between common love, physical desire, and heavenly love, love of the soul and the intellect. Then Eryximachus, that's a hard one, say that one twice, a doctor who expands this idea to view love as a universal cosmic force of harmony and balance. And then Aristophanes offers a famous humorous myth that humans were once spherical beings who were split in half by Zeus, condemning us to spend our lives searching for our other half. And then Socrates shows up and presents the pinnacle speech recounting the teachings of a wise woman, the philosopher Diotima, and then he goes on to reject the idea that love is merely seeking the missing half, instead defining love as a ladder of love. He explains that love begins as an attraction to physical beauty, but ultimately transforms into a physical pursuit of eternal truth, wisdom, and the ultimate form of the good. So what we have to take into consideration here is who Aristophanes is. Now, Aristophanes from Greek history, he's a famous playwright. And I'm pretty sure, if I'm not mistaken, I don't want to Google this right now because I'm in a flow state, but Aristophanes, I'm pretty sure, wrote some insulting plays about Socrates. So this is like Plato getting his get back at Aristophanes.
Yeah.
Because there's weird things in this story where like you'd only know this if you literally knew like the beef between these people that they had with each other. Plato making Aristophanes say like get really drunk and say a bunch of stupid things that make him look stupid actually makes perfect sense because he doesn't like him, right? So it's like, yeah, there's a lot of like secret infighting that's going on here, right?
You could kind of feel that, but you're not really sure what. There's like some flirting going on, and maybe some stuff's happened.
It just reminds me of like a ancient burn book.
Yeah, exactly. It's like we've immortalized this diss track, basically.
Well, that plays into what you're saying, where like even if you disagree with someone or you maybe don't want to spend time with them, it's in the interest of what is good to invite everyone to the party and have a drink because that's the spirit of democracy.
And so we also have to remember that, okay, so Socrates delivers us philosophy by quoting a midwife philosopher. Now tell me that's not poetic at the end of the day. Plato's using Socrates, and this is a story from Socrates because obviously Plato is never, I don't think he meets Diotima. I think she's a much older character, like from Pythagoras' time. Basically, it's funny that she's a midwife, but she ends up delivering philosophy like it's a baby.
Yeah.
So it's like without her, we wouldn't have been able to deliver this baby, which is philosophy.
What is astounding to me is they didn't expect the text to conclude with Socrates, immortalized through Plato, so strongly aligning itself with Eros, of course, in his own terms, as he's just explained through Diotima, but nonetheless, you get the impression that Eros, the god, is the key to so much, and this had passed me completely. As someone who's so into Thelema, I almost feel like if I wanted to explain Thelema to somebody who had no idea about it, I would just give them the Symposium, because that explains the things that I've learned in Thelema in a way that is already native to Western philosophy. I had just never read the Symposium yet.
I mean, they make a point to explain desire without lust for result, and that does have a lot to do with how Eros is explained.
So much of the difference between, well, it's like, well, everyone knows there's a common Eros and a heavenly Eros, just as there are two Aphrodites. And I found this to be extremely helpful. If you wanted to explain why Thelema isn't just butt sex and strippers, this dialogue would really help. You know what I mean? Because it's essentially the same thing. And explaining Eros as a medium rather than a god, I think, is a huge magical secret. And even leading up to Socrates speaking, you get the, like, from a magician standpoint, the early speakers are performing what appears to be magic. They're like invoking the deity, or like you know, you say, oh, this deity's so great, it has these qualities, etc., etc. But then here Socrates comes and he's like, we're gonna go even harder and even deeper, and only then will we arrive at the true power of Eros, and it ends up being this key to everything. Like I've heard it said by La Maladuquette, a lot of early magicians, they fail because they do all the spells correctly, they do all the names correctly, they do the sigils and the time of day, but they're missing the romance. They're missing the love in their heart. And if you listen real close to that dialogue, you're not going to be able to make the magic work unless you you have Eros, unless you are embodying Eros. And Diotima's presented in the text as like, dude, we had a plague in Athens and we needed this chick to come do sacrifices. And that was the only time we had a respite from the plague, is because she understands not just philosophy, but through her philosophy understands the principles of magic such that our priesthood would seek her out. You know what I mean?
Well, it's all too easy to hit the ceiling of your own perception. And I think that holds true for how Eros is described in the text, where you kind of cap yourself at your own understanding of it. So if you think of it as being more related to physical Eros as opposed to heavenly Eros, or you even misinterpret the link between the two, you kind of hit your own ceiling of understanding. And I think that's true also for modern day Thelema.
And then there's one final part after, actually, although it says that Socrates ends the symposium with the Diotima speech, actually there's one thing that happens after that you kind of alluded to. It's when Alcibiades comes in and he's all drunk and he starts hitting on Socrates. That's what you're talking about, right? Okay, so this is a really messed up part of the story, but it's very important. Once again, you have to understand who Alcibiades is for this to make sense. Otherwise, it just seems like a random drunk guy just shows up and starts hitting on Socrates. It would make no sense, right?
He's real good looking.
So remember, just
right? Like Alcibiades is good looking.
Yeah, that picture I sent you. He is the beautiful. He is like, this is the point, is that Socrates is depicted in the Republic as not physically attractive at this point because he's like 75 or something like that. Like he's already lived his life. He has a wife at the time and he has kids actually, even though he's 75, but he's not physically attractive. But he is the wisest, best person in Athens, right? Alcibiades is a rich man. He's famous. He's powerful. He's extremely good looking, but he's a very bad person, okay? But he loves Socrates, right? Because Socrates is everything that he isn't. So Alcibiades shows up drunk to the party, missed the whole important part of the party, shows up and then starts complaining to everyone that Socrates won't have a relationship with him for whatever reason, which is literally demonstrating the whole point that Socrates was trying to make and that Plato was trying to make, showing that no matter if you are beautiful, you're attractive, you're a celebrity, all these things, it doesn't matter, because what's really the only true wealth is the wealth of the soul, the wealth of the individual, the good life, right? The good life isn't the Alcibiades life, the being drunk and messing around, because in reality, what happens later is Alcibiades becomes a very unpopular character because I'm pretty sure he defects to the Spartans and betrays Athens and basically becomes a general on the other side. So people start distrusting Socrates because some of his students do messed up things like Alcibiades. So when you think about it in the long term, now it makes sense why Plato would choose this particular person to make this particular point. Just like Aristophanes. Aristophanes' story makes absolutely no sense. He's talking about like how Zeus made people, cut people into half, and half is a man and half is a woman, and that's why we search for our other half.
Yeah.
It's obviously a made-up story to make him look stupid, but you wouldn't know that unless you understood like the full context of the character and why Plato wants these particular people to look ridiculous.
I don't know why I've heard that story so many times, but never in its proper context of like the Symposium. Like the humans are born with 2 heads and 4 arms. It's the most ridiculous idea, and I'm happy that I'm getting the point that it's supposed to be ridiculous.
Is this like where we get twin flame crap?
That's essentially what
dude,
he
that
argues.
shit's so cringe.
It is so cringe.
Well, it's funny because that's how they're presenting it, you know, back in BCE, is that it was cringe back then.
Yeah, exactly. It wasn't like a good idea back then either.
Yeah, but people think it's like the truth now, which is so funny.
I have had like a couple like female stalker, I don't want to say stalkers, but like girls who have fallen in love with me over the internet and been like, oh, we're twin flames. It's like, okay, this is like my like 6th twin flame now.
Or even like the concept of a soulmate. I wonder if it comes from that specifically.
So interestingly about the soulmate thing, so I think if we take the soulmate and we add incarnation to it from a Pythagorean perspective, what if the soulmate isn't as if you're born and there's one person who's your person? Imagine the soulmate is like the same person that your soul has fallen in love with throughout multiple lives throughout history.
Yeah.
Pythagoras didn't die. He's still with us. He's another person. Diotima, Socrates, Plato, if they're right, then none of these people's souls actually died. They're still here. They're just reincarnated as another person.
I always viewed it as like, it's not how people think romantically about a soulmate, but that if you do encounter someone like that, it's like your extended soul family that you often incarnate with. So it's like, hey, homeboy, like I knew you in another life. So you have that connection, but it doesn't mean that you're fated to like have a Romeo and Juliet experience with them and like die together or like whatever.
I mean, don't we get sick of people once in a while?
Yeah, for sure. But it's like, if you
Get
can
tired of
recognize,
twin flaming with you, bro. No more.
but I feel like we can recognize each other from past because of that. But it's not necessarily like eros or romance. It's not about that. It's something else.
Well, there's different kinds of love. There's filiae, storge, and I forget the other one. There's like 3 different kinds. It's family love, and I forget what the Latin terms are, but it's like I learned about this. I took a course called the philosophy of love. They literally had that at university. It was like family love, friend love, and romantic love. So there's 3 different delineations of love.
There's the
and
butt
all of
sex
them
love.
Ooh,
I
that's
guess
Which
that
one-
would be the romantic one.
They talk about that in the
Oh, yeah.
Symposium. They talk about that. They say, like, look, if you want the butt sex from a boy that's not mature enough to, like, have his own thoughts,
Ew,
that's a
that's
little
yuck,
icky
yuck.
and gross. Yeah, that's icky and yuck, and it's to be looked down upon. But if you are attracted to a young man who shows signs that he will be moral and have a good memory and speak real good, then it's noble for you to, like, show up on his doorstep in the middle of the night and beg for his little itsy bitsy feet to be wiped on your face or whatever they did back then. I don't know. But not the other way around, you know? And
They combed each other's hair.
and see, that's the thing is like the love that could produce a child, that's like earthly. And that is related to Eros because it's us loving the goodness that's related to immortality.
Bro, have
But
you
the
ever heard
love
of the
that you
sacred
could
band?
get between a man and a boy is the purest love.
Words can't express what you mean to me.
Oh my God, that's so cringe.
That's, I mean,
But have you?
That's what they,
talking about-
I mean,
Let's- Julian, do you know what the sacred band is?
That
Okay, so it's the most elite fighting force in all of Greece. And what they basically did was they had 2 butt buddies get together and they paired them all in an entire like army, like a unit, like a
they
elite
talk
unit.
about that.
And yeah, and they were like unstoppable.
That's what he said.
They were called the sacred band.
They were like, look, okay, you know how when you do a bad, you could embarrass yourself with your kid or your parents, and that's like one thing. But if you embarrass yourself in front of like your lover or your crush, that's the worst. So they're like, what we should do is make sure everyone in the military is lovers because then they would always be heroic. They would always be self-sacrificing. They didn't say it, but I was like, that's the fucking Spartans, bro. And then I saw...
No, they could go toe to toe with Spartans, the sacred band. They were
Wait,
probably
wait.
the only
No,
other
wait.
force
I just
that
did
could
a
go toe to toe
I
with
just did
them.
a search on them. There was only 300 of them, which is interesting.
Yeah, I said they were an elite unit.
150 male couples, 300 men in total, organized by age. They were a Theban army in the 4th century BC, 400 years before Jesus, and they were eventually defeated and destroyed by Philip of Macedon and younger Alexander the Great. So interesting that Alexander the Great and Philip of Macedon come through and obliterate them later because they took over all of Greece. So it would make sense for that to take place, right?
Hey man, you got to go out somehow. Might as well go out gloriously with your butt buddy.
hey, I had a quick question before we move on from the love stuff. They have all the different loves you were just listing. What's agape? Because that's used a lot in like religious context, but it's unconditional love, like godly or divine love. So I didn't know if is that part of Plato's stuff or is that something separate that was like coined later?
It's an ancient Greek word that refers to the most selfless form of love, characterized by unconditional sacrificial action that seeks the best for others, irrespective of circumstances. And it's like also Christian theology frequently describes God's perfect love for humanity and the reciprocal love believers are called to show. So it's some kind of like self-sacrificing love. I guess it's like a love that like almost it transcends like the individual kind of. It's almost like you lose yourself in the concept of it. It's almost like what I've talked about before about how you can be possessed by the zeitgeist or the spirit of the time. It's almost like you're possessed by the spirit of Eros and you just end up like, you know, doing stuff like Van Gogh or something, like sending your ear to a girl or something like that. Like it's almost like being possessed by the spirit of love itself.
Or like, you know, if the Persians are bearing down on your little precious boyfriend and his speared shield, you'll jump in and save him if it means giving up your life, which is considered noble and good.
It also applies It also applies to strangers, though. Like, it's implied that you would sacrifice for your not just your family or lover.
Right. So hear me out here. The numerical value of agape is 93, which is also thelema. And so in the system of thelema, that is what it is meant to represent. And it
Love under cringe. Cringe is the law.
well, this is what it's discussing in the Symposium. That's what it means. Love is the law, love under will is that it that's why Eros is described as a medium, because underlying all of your actions should be love or Eros. And so the Symposium takes all of that weird abstraction that you find in thelema and it just says it in plain English or Latin or whatever it was, you know.
Greek, yeah. So I was gonna say, if anyone is interested in like being a really big nerd and being into the Plato stuff and getting super into like the context, like I was getting into trying to understand who the people are that are talking in the dialogue, because it matters who these people are. There's another character called Xenophon, and Xenophon is another student of Socrates, and he also defects to the Spartans as well. So I don't know if you're seeing a little bit of a pattern here. It's almost like students from Socrates get really interested in Sparta, and almost all of them end up like getting interested in it, including Plato himself, right? Xenophon basically was an ancient Athenian soldier, a historian, and a philosopher. He was a younger contemporary student of Socrates, and he wrote his own symposium as well, recounting the same party, but with slightly different settings. It's called Xenophon's Symposium, yes, and it recounts the same party, but one of the things that he chooses to add to it is that there's a point where dancing girls come in, and they're like playing music, and his version of the party is like way more crazy, like there's way more partying going on, everyone's being wild and stuff. So it's different than Plato's Symposium, because Plato makes it more like an academic lecture, whereas Xenophon's one, it's like, and then there's dancing girls, and then there's partying, and people are more drunk. So because he's like I guess he's a younger man, and he's more interested in other elements of it than Plato was interested in. So it's interesting how you can see the same event described by two different people. And once again, if you're interested in context and understanding the characters, it's important to see that the defection of Xenophon and Alcibiades basically made Socrates look like he was teaching people to distrust the city of Athens, because it's like, why are all your best students leaving? Not only leaving, but joining the literal our worst enemy, because they really they don't really depict it properly, but they really didn't like each other.
Like Luke Skywalker
You gotta explain yourself a little bit.
and his Jedi Academy, all the ones that turned to the dark side.
Yeah.
That's what it
Oh,
reminds
you
me
mean
of.
Kylo Ren kind of? Oh, I get what you're saying. Like he's
I mean-
like
the fan
Xenophon's
fiction.
like Kylo Ren or something.
Well, even in the expanded universe, this happens.
That's true. Expanded universe is superior. You're right.
Yeah, you fucking reactionary.
There's some really
right,
profound
no,
stuff
she's
that I
right.
wanted to add, though, if you have a chance. There's some really important stuff that needs to be said about this book, just to give people some understanding of why some people consider this book to be one of the most important books ever written in human history. And I think that we should do it justice to understand why that is the case. Like, there's only a couple other books in human history that have ever had as much significance. I would say the Bible, maybe Atlas Shrugged, a couple other books that have been able to have this level of impact on humanity.
Lord of the Rings is another.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, but then you could say that all of the books after him were like so deeply influenced by him, including our political systems, our philosophical system, the entire West, as North Whitehead says, all Western philosophy is merely footnotes to Plato. All of it.
True.
The good
It's
news,
not an exaggeration.
when you read Plato, it's really easy to relate to. You know what I mean? Like, that's why we should keep it around, because it helps us understand ourselves. It's not hard to imagine. It's like, oh, I'm on my way to a party, and then my friend came and like tugged on my cloak and was like, hey man, what are you doing? It's like, it's stuff that you can imagine. It's stuff that you've maybe been through yourself.
Hey
Keep it
man,
around.
come join the sacred band with me.
Oh, I was going to say, so we have to take into consideration the Odyssey, which is being talked about right now in huge fashion. And there's a reason for that, because before philosophy, Greek heroes were, through the Odyssey and the Iliad, that was Greek civilization. When I tell everybody, read the classics, read the Odyssey and the Iliad, don't watch the movie, because they used to believe in the Greek society before the philosophers that all you needed was these poets in order to teach you about life. So it was like all of Greek civilization was wrapped up into these stories. And so the Greek heroes, like before the Greeks settled down and became agrarian and moved towards more civilization, they were more nomadic pirates and raiding fighting parties, and it makes sense why their heroes also exemplified those same characteristics. So you think about Ajax, Achilles, or Odysseus. These were not necessarily morally good characters, although they were very strong characters. They're the heroes from renown that they talk about in the Bible, basically. And some of them, like Achilles, were literally half god and or immortal or something like that. But essentially, like, Achilles was not a good person, and we all know that, right? Like, when he hated someone, he would destroy them. If he wanted to have sex, he would have sex. There was nothing he couldn't do if he didn't want to do it, basically, because nobody could stop him. And this is basically the example that they were giving to people before philosophy existed of how to live a good life. It was like to be a warlike hero, and the gods in the city all exemplified each other, like the macrocosm and the microcosm. What Plato did was he used Socrates to replace Achilles. So think of the displacement or the demotion of the Greek heroes from their position of prominence in society and demoting them to a lower position in society, because the Greek heroes are the heroes of the body, where Socrates is the hero of the mind.
Yeah,
so
much more close
and
to
I
now.
always talk about this. Yeah, we move from the mythos to the logos, right? The mythos meaning the mythological, the logos meaning like the divine mind or whatever. So essentially, Greek heroes, although they represented a strong, powerful civilization, there were certain immoral characteristics that they had that prevented them. They were like soap opera characters, basically. And the idea that you should be teaching everybody from like a Greek soap opera, basically, is like not the best, because they're very dramatic characters. They're violent. They're not rational. They're not morally good people. So to teach an entire civilization to emulate Achilles and Ajax and Odysseus would turn out very badly in the long run, right?
That sort of sounds like
trying to
these days.
That sounds like, I was gonna say that. It sounds like that's how it is today, isn't it? That feels like that's how it is today. Dude,
notice how they're using the Odyssey right now. Notice how the Odyssey has become very important to people right now. What does that tell you? That tells you we're living in the days of the very immorality that Plato was trying to dispense with. He was trying to move from that time period where the strong do what they want and the weak do what they must. That was the opposite, because if you remember in the Republic, he talks about that, how the might is right perspective is wrong. Correct. And that's what those people represented, right? So Plato was trying to move it. Literally, you can also see human civilization being dragged forward out of the clutches of the Greek heroes into the realm of the logos.
Hell yeah. And Jesus was like the candle on top of that.
I think you could
very much so
argue that Jesus was the candle on top of that. I think you could, because
hell yeah. Because look at it this way. Before Jesus, it was about might is right, like what Julian is saying. Whereas after Jesus, the entire like paradigm shifted to not who's the strongest, might is right. It shifted to how to play the game is what matters.
It almost sounds more heated than anything I read in the Apology or the one where he has to actually drink the poison. The opening of the Republic, it almost sounds like they come to blows, and they don't, because it's a party and they respect Socrates. But what's the name of the person he's speaking to in that? I don't know my Greek names that well. Book one.
What?
They're celebrating Bendis. Let me look it up. I got it here.
Okay, while we are in that little pause, did you know that there's a lot of evidence that during the Bronze Age collapse, that the Philistines were actually Greeks, the Philistines from the Bible, like the sea people.
Oh, because they're on boats?
Yeah, that would make a lot of sense. Like I said, before the Greeks settled down in the Bronze Age, they were raiders and they were moving around doing a lot of damage in the area. So it would make sense that there would be these like roving bands of like Greek mercenaries and fighters and pirates, and that maybe they like formed some kind of group, because it is strange that they went around, they defeated the Egyptians, and then they disappeared. Like they didn't stay around to like form a new government or anything.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like from the Bronze Age collapse era where we were defeated by the sea peoples, and that's them. I believe it's the Greeks, at least.
That's a good argument.
It's book one of the Republic. They're all at an event together. Socrates is talking, and then Thrasymachus, I think I'm saying it right. Thrasymachus comes in, he's like, Socrates, you are entirely full of shit. At one point, he accuses his nurse of not wiping his own nose or something. Thrasymachus basically sees Socrates' argument as drivel, and it's the opinion of somebody who hasn't fought in a war. But he's saying that the good life is the immoral life, and that justice is there for the weak to serve the strong, and that it is might that makes makes right, and that it is moral people who cannot be depended upon to be strong or take the lead or to use immorality enough to advance themselves. And so the good life is the immoral life. That's what he says. That's what Thrasymachus is saying. He is basically representing the philosophy of what we're talking about. You know, these Greek pirates, you know, might makes right. And he's saying, like, the leaders should look at the people as if they are sheep to be shorn, and that a leader is constantly looking after their own good at the expense of the people that they lead. And Socrates is like, you've got it all wrong, and not only do you have it all wrong, you have it dangerously wrong. So without us coming to blows, let us discuss using your own arguments why you are wrong. And the whole time Thrasymachus is like, you are annoying, I don't like how you're arguing, you've backed me into a corner, like, yeah, go ahead and just tell me your argument, you're gonna tell me anyway. And it almost sounds like a neurotypical person arguing with an autistic person. It makes me wonder if Socrates was autistic, and that's why he was impervious to certain forms of charisma or certain arguments that appealed to emotion. And if not, he certainly fits the neurodivergent archetype to some extent, if only because of how closely he sticks to what he's saying and doesn't like get off course. He just sticks to exactly what he's saying. And he can get Thrasymachus to agree in his own terms that the tyrant and the criminal live a miserable life. And that if criminals and tyrants didn't have some form of goodness or selflessness, they couldn't even work amongst each other. You know what I mean? And so he basically philosophically puts an end to might makes right in the beginning of the Republic. And I can only assume it begins that way because that's important for having a republic. In the first place, you have to assert that justice is there to protect the people. It's not to serve the individual. And that is what society, or the society we should want, a good society, is founded upon. Justice, goodness, the law, you know, all that stuff. And then I could see why Jesus could become a symbol of that. That makes sense to me.
Yeah, so we have to understand who Thrasymachus is. Once again, you have to remember who the character is.
He sounds like
He's
a badass.
sophist.
Oh, he's a sophist.
He's
okay.
a sophist.
He just says whatever to get what he wants.
So he's saying whatever he needs to say to get paid. Thrasymachus is basically a tutor who rich people pay to teach them how to talk and use rhetoric to get what they want out of other people. So he teaches verbal manipulation and like debate bro tactics. So think of Thrasymachus as a debate bro. So when Thrasymachus says, I don't like the way you're debating, it's because Thrasymachus is looking for the win condition and Socrates is looking for the truth.
Yes.
Which is two different things. So, and also you have to remember that Socrates, the Socratic method that Socrates developed is involving him asking questions, constantly asking questions of the other person and not sharing his own perspective. That's why they're always pushing him like, tell us what you think. And he's like, no, I don't want to tell you what I think. I'm just going to keep finding out what you think by asking you questions based on what you say. So it's almost like Socrates is like the best CIA interrogator you've ever met in your entire life, because he can just like pull information out of people and he doesn't give them anything. And it's such an annoying conversation for people, because imagine somebody where every time you ask them a question, they ask you a question in return and they don't give you the answer you're looking for. So that's probably the reason why Thrasymachus is like pissed off with him, because it's like they're looking for different win conditions, basically.
I don't know, man. Sometimes I watch Canadian politics.
Bro, when I have a conversation with my wife, she seems like Socrates and I seem like Thrasymachus. Like, I'm telling you, I think Socrates was a little on the spectrum. And it's this thing where like Thrasymachus is relying on like social cues and riz and like momentum, and like he uses ad hominem, you know what I mean, in his argument. And Socrates is like, we'll just like, I'm not doing any of that. I'm simply sticking to your arguments and your reasoning, and I'm going to prove you are wrong using your own words. And, you know, I skip past 5 books. I get to book 6, and he's having a conversation with someone else, and they're going over like, you know that everyone finds you irritating, right? You know what I mean? Like, people don't like talking to you, Socrates, because you make them talk by answering a bunch of your questions, and then you make them answer so many questions that by the end of it, they've negated what they started with, and people feel that this is manipulation in some way, even though they don't know how to articulate it. It seemed like I was reading something from like 500 BC that could have happened like, 5 minutes ago.
That's what makes him a great teacher, though, because he doesn't just tell you what the truth is. He shows you, and you discover the truth on your own through your own logic and perception. That's what makes him a great teacher.
Yep.
I was going to say, let's not forget that there's this interplay between philosophers as well that we have to take into consideration. So I remember we had a conversation before where you said, what does Nietzsche think of this situation? And how does that relate us to the modern day? How does that create a bridge between the past and the future? How we can make this stuff relevant to people today? And I think the way we can make it relevant to people, because, you know, why would they care about a house party 2,500 years ago or something, right? Which essentially that's what it is. So we're all like obsessing about Western civilization is based on a house party.
Yeah.
Because that's what we're all about.
It's relatable.
You know?
It's relatable.
Yeah, and don't forget, it's also music as well. So think about it. So Plato is basically like a modern day like podcaster who's like hiding Easter eggs in his like in the Republic, and he's working out, and like it's like all these things that you could honestly see a modern person doing. It's like he's doing all these things that we're engaged in. I think he would totally like, maybe we'd have to explain some of the dynamics to him, but he would be like, oh yeah, I totally get all this stuff. Especially don't forget Plato's cave. The cave of the allegory is one of the most powerful metaphors for, you know, a controlled society and the raising up, coming out of the darkness and into enlightenment, out of the cave of illusions. But the important part about the bridge is that Nietzsche hated Plato and Socrates the way Plato hated Homer. So Plato hated Homer because Plato was so mad at Homer because Homer is so good. He's so amazing. He's a natural talent. He's like a genius, basically. But Homer has devoted his artistic abilities to writing characters that are immoral, basically. All the heroes he writes are immoral, according to Plato. They're objectively immoral, even by today's standards, but even 2,000 years ago, they still thought these people were immoral. So it's not like there's like a very big shift. It's like people knew what they were, right? And basically, the reason that Plato hated them is because they were so central to everything. And he said, I'm going to replace them. I'm going to replace Homer with Plato. And
I would say Odysseus is probably the least. Go on, sorry though.
Odysseus is like the most craftiest one of the three, and he's also the smartest, but he also does a bunch of weird stuff, like, you know, he'll lie to people, or he'll steal, or he'll deceive people. So he's not like a terrible person like Achilles or Ajax is, but Odysseus is like Loki. He's like the trickster god, basically.
I said the least. And least worst is
and so Nietzsche basically did the same thing to Plato and Socrates that Plato did to Homer. He tried to displace them because Nietzsche knows, like I do, that Plato is the most significant philosopher in Western civilization. If you don't know Plato, you don't know philosophy. So Nietzsche says, I'm going to replace Plato with myself. I'm the new guy, right? He's doing the exact same thing to them that they did to Homer. Yeah, he's the new guy in town, basically. And Nietzsche said, I'm the new guy. And Nietzsche even went further than that. He said, not only am I going to replace Plato, but I'm going to replace Jesus himself, and I'm going to become the new guy, and I am the guy that comes to end everything. So it's interesting how these people all relate to each other because they're like having a conversation with each other. Like Nietzsche's talking directly to Plato's ghost. Plato's talking to Homer's ghost.
Damn, dude, drop the mic. Thunk.
Will you stay with us for one more hour so we can discuss how that is important and why and how it's affecting our society today and what we're going to do about it?
All right.
Well, then, if you'd like to hear that part of the conversation, then you're going to have to visit www.patreon.com/thewholerabbit and pay us at least $5, where that monthly donation will give you instant access to the second half of this episode, our entire backlog, going back 7 years of extended episodes, and instant access to our Discord server, where you can induce the people that you're hearing right now on this show into a philosophical conversation, because we cannot resist. Until then, everybody, thank you, eat carrots, and shoot lasers.
Pew, pew, pew.
Oh, Julian, tell us where we can find you.
Right, so I'm on Medium, Julian Soloninka, and that's where you're going to find all my writings. And on Facebook and YouTube, same, it would be Julian the Philosopher or Julian Soloninka.
And what was that other podcast you just did your cyberpunk collab with?
That's actually on my YouTube channel. That was just me alone, just having a dialogue with a really great author.
Check out all that stuff. And if you want more of this conversation, we'll see you on Patreon. Thank you, everybody. Eat carrots and shoot lasers.
Pew, pew, pew.